public health crisis. So I guess the first thing I want to address is when I say public health, what do I mean by that? And so, as part of the definition of public health is basically it promotes and protects the health of people and the communities where they live, work, and play. And right, so for example, where doctors basically treat people for sicknesses, people in that are engaged in working in public health basically prevent people from getting sick or injured in the first place. And some of the people that we consider to be working in the field of public health include first responders, restaurant inspectors, health educators, scientists and researchers, nutritionists, community planners, social workers, and those types of occupations. Now, recently, the two EMTs who were fired earlier this week for failing to aid Tyree Nichols actually had their licenses suspended by the Tennessee Emergency Medical Services Board. And recently there was a virtual meeting, I guess this past Friday, and they voted unanimously to impose a summary suspension on EMT Jamichael Sandridge and EMT Robert Long. Sandridge and Long were dispatched and arrived at the scene where Nichols was handcuffed on the ground. They got there about 8:41 p.m. and the Memphis Fire Department leader said that the EMTs requested an ambulance but failed to do an adequate assessment of Nichols. They said that Sandridge, faulting Sandridge for failing to administer an IV or monitor Nichols' vital signs and faulting both men for failing to administer high flow oxygen or offer any other meaningful aid. Long and Sandrith both approached Nichols carrying medical supply bags, but didn't aid Nichols for the duration of the footage. Gibbs said. He said that they were his best shot, and they failed to help. And the board voted separately on each EMT suspension. Both votes were unanimous, with two members being absent. So now I don't know. I mean, very seldom do you hear a situation where you have EMTs or medical emergency personnel who are responsible or who actually get sanctioned or suspended for not helping. But I want to read that again because I just want to make sure that everybody understands and know what I mean by the issue of what I mean by public health. And the question is police brutality a public health crisis? And again, public health promotes and protects the health of people and the communities where they learn, work, and play. And while doctors treat people who are sick, public health tries to prevent people from getting sick or injured in the first place. And we went back and we talked about the fact that there were first responders are part of the public health community, or those workers who are involved in that type of work. And we know that in Memphis, the two police officers who were actually dispatched to the location were fired for failing to aid Tyree Nichols after he was beaten by police, and have now had their license suspended by the Tennessee Emergency Medical Services Board, and they voted unanimously to impose a summary suspension on Jamichael Sandridge and Robert Long. Sandridge and Long were dispatched and arrived at the scene where Nichols was handcuffed on the ground at about 8:41 p.m. And Memphis Fire Department leaders said that the EMTs requested an ambulance but failed to do an adequate assessment of Nichols. Sandridge for failing, he faulted Sandridge for failing to administer an IV or monitor Nichols' vital signs, and faulted both men for failing to administer high flow oxygen or offer any other meaningful aid. Long and Sandridge both approached carrying medical supply bags, but didn't aid Nichols for the duration of the footage. They stated they were his best shot, and they failed to help. And the board voted separately on each EMT suspension. Both votes were unanimous, with two members absent. So I guess the question is, does it matter, and what is the significance of calling out police violence as a public health crisis? I guess that's really the question. And I know that the American Public Health Association and American Medical Association both have stated that police brutality is a public health crisis. I'm reading an article from the American Medical Association where it says that about 1,000 people die at the hands of police each year. And they say that African Americans are 3 times more likely to die than their white counterparts during a police encounter. And they said that a 2008 statistics from the National Academy of Science indicated that 1 in 1,000 African American men or boys will be killed by police in their lifetime. That's pretty high, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's pretty, a significant number, and now they're addressing it as a public health crisis. I mean, one of the things that is alarming, that is alarming when it comes to the issue of police violence and police brutality, is that we see so much, um, you know, things relative to police, um, um, violence that's been addressed politically, been addressed in all so many different type of forums. But the problem is that it tends to be like most things when it involves African Americans. The reaction is always goes at a snail's pace, and you wonder why there's such a slow reaction when it comes to issues that are clearly of impacting African Americans, and police brutality impacts a lot of people other than African Americans. But I mean, obviously, we know that it impacts African Americans at a disproportionate number. And what we see again as we talk, for example, and I'm just trying to get it out there because I think to some degree I'm just venting, I guess you can say. So, when you look at the issue of police brutality and you clearly see that there is an ongoing issue constantly addressing police officers, whether it's unlawful killings, whether it's unlawful beatings, and many other areas. I mean, we've been seeing things where, police are, doing things there is no exception. I mean, from children to elderly people that are being mistreated by police. And the response has always been a response that addresses it. We see, so many different newscasts. We see it being addressed in so many different forums. We also see, for example, like in Tyree Nichols, we see the fact that individuals are being arrested, or terminated and being arrested. But now that we've determined that it is a public health issue, at least by the American Medical Association, which I think is good enough. The question is, how do we, you know, what do we do as far as really making a difference in this country as it addresses the issue, as a nation when it comes to police brutality? I mean, we still are even still, wrangling with the whole George Floyd situation, right? And people are so slow and reluctant to do any of those, to implement any kind of bills or any kind of really significant policy that specifically addresses things as it relates to African Americans. And if you notice that every time that there is an issue and a crisis that disproportionately impacts African Americans, whenever there is a bill or law, a statute, or whatever there may be to address the issue, it always has a broad base of just addressing people of color, but never specifically addressing the fact that it's disproportionately impacting African Americans. Even when there are bills, it never says, any kind of act it just says, even when we talk about, some of the things when it came to addressing the disparagement when it comes to jury selections and stuff like that, it always
Mm.
begins with this just broad,
Yeah.
cross section of the community, because nobody really wants to address the issue, which is the major issue in this country, at least as and let's just be clear, is with African Americans, without
Yep.
question. And the question is, why is it that we are always fearful of actually? I mean, we just hear a lot of talk. We hear a lot of things. For example, even from the president and his promise of Joe Biden to address the issue of African Americans, which in many ways he was much, he had a big hand in much of the crisis in our country when it came to African Americans, especially with his stance on the prison, the sentencing, the disproportionate sentencing
Yeah.
that he was engaged in. But we don't really hear how are you really going to do anything about it, and how are you going to really fix any of these things. That's the problem, and nobody wants to fix any. If you want to address anything that has to do with African Americans, the only thing that they really want to do for African Americans is give us a holiday, a stamp, or something like that. They don't want to
Mm.
do anything that's going to have a significant impact, that's going to even the playing field. And I think again, I think at the essence of what is fearful, what they fear in this country is if they equal the playing field, that obviously there's going to be, the fear that maybe their so-called or their perceived privilege may be in jeopardy, right?
Mhm.
So I'm going to go to you
Mhm.
guys and kind of get your impact and your feeling about any of this.
I mean, in terms of talking about the fact that, they really never addressed um, the issue that African Americans have been struggling with in this country, which is, feeling the effects of systematic oppression. I think it's because in itself, it's what allows a lot of these people to stay in office. Continuing to oppress African Americans allows these individuals to stay there. And I think too, one of the things that just came to mind is the bill that Joe Biden put out there, the executive order that he put out there for Asian Americans. Right, there was a period where Asian Americans were being discriminated, and he took it as so far as to put out there an executive order saying, "Hey, this is not going to fly by."
Yeah.
But African Americans have been struggling with discrimination, oppression, systematic, and nothing has been done about that.
Yeah.
And to the aspect of police brutality in the U.S. being viewed as, a public health concern, I think that there's definitely some sort of legitimacy. There's consequences for both physical, emotional health. Police brutality can result in physical harm, and it can have long-term health effects for individuals. And not only that, but the psychological trauma of witnessing police brutality can result, in conditions resulting into anxiety, sadness. And police violence has a disproportionate negative impact on populations that are already disenfranchised, right?
Right.
But it's even in the wording of addressing it as a public health crisis that it affects populations, but they don't necessarily say, hey, the people that it's mainly affecting is African
Right.
Americans in this country. And I
Right.
think the reason why we go there is because, one, they see the power in, the fact that the black vote was what got Joe Biden. The black vote was what got Kamala Harris. And I mean, they haven't done anything for the black folk.
Right.
And they're still in office. And they're going to continue to be in office. And I think it's just in a very blatant call saying, African Americans in this country, we're not going to do anything for you. Why?
Yeah.
Because who's going to come out and speak up for them, right?
Yeah.
Who's going to go out there? Who's going to be the Martin Luther King? Who's going to be the Malcolm X? There's
Yeah.
none of those leaders nowadays. And I think that's what we're lacking, that nobody sees And I think that they do see, in some sense, the power that the African American community have, that in putting those words in this public health crisis, then what does that do? In one end, it makes the African American community stronger to come together. But in the other end, you also have the, well, I mean, are they really going to riot? Are they really going to do anything about it? And I think it's like a twofold issue where the answer is very complex, but it's just very discouraging that, yes, a lot of the times, you know, the African American issues aren't taken seriously in this country. And it's because oppression and racism is systematic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of it. I mean, I think that would America be America without the oppression of black people?
Mm.
I mean, in other words, in other words, you know, I think that when we look at the issue of of issues regarding African Americans, I mean, I think that because it is at the very fabric of the society, it's older. It's the oldest institution in America.
Yeah.
There's no institution older than the mistreatment of black people. It began in, you know, even before it became, obviously before it became a country. That's how it all started. In fact, the oppression of black people actually predates the culture of anyone else coming to this country. I mean, most people who come to this country came to this country, um, you know, post, you know, the Revolutionary War, right, or post the Civil War, right? So, in other words, you know, since from the very beginning that you had the mistreatment of African Americans, and you have so many people who came to this country after that, then it was part of the fabric. That was what they were coming to. I mean, there wasn't a time in history of America where that wasn't at the, you know, at the very foundation of the country. That's, you know, that's who we really are. And now, when you talk about a culture or the foundation of America, if we were to have a significant cultural shift or paradigm shift in America, what would America look like? You see what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
mean,
Exactly.
and that's the question. What would it be America? You see what I mean?
Mm. That's
So,
where the fear comes from.
huh?
Mm.
I said that's where the fear comes from.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of like when you sit down and you look at how do you get there, because it's not as, you know, changing race in America is more than just implementing some sort of legislation or creating some sort of, you know, policy or pseudo policy, you know, or calling for some sort of change in some sort of policy. Um, it's going to just basically shake the core of America, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the question: is, you know, are we capable? Is America the real question is, are we capable of a society to have that type of cultural shift? Huh?
Hmm.
I mean,
is it even part of our is it are we capable of doing it? Is it part of who we are? Could we even do that? That's the question. Huh?
I don't I don't see that happening, unfortunately. Um, for one, you have to admit all the way around that that is a problem, that it is a problem, and it faces black more than others. No one's willing to admit that. If I can sugarcoat what's really going on, I can't change the major problem.
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking to somebody. We're being gaslit. Like that's what's crazy. We're being gaslit by America.
mm-hmm.
What you're experiencing is not happening just to predominantly to you. What you think you're going through, what you think you're witnessing, it's not really that. We're being gaslit. America is a narcissist. So, and until we can address that issue and get those that can help make the change to admit that that's an issue, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree in that I think that addressing the issue facing African American communities in America will require a multifaceted approach that addresses historical systematic racism,
Right.
unconscious bias, political polarization, lack of representation, and economic interest is an
All, yeah.
intersectional issue we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Wow.
too much. I think that's too much for America to want to take responsibility for. I
Mm.
don't. I just don't. Because I mean, just think about all the things that have to be addressed, like you just said: housing, health, education, criminal system, all of these things. And part of the reason why they don't want to teach critical race theory, because we're going to have to point out the truth of stuff. And if you make the good guy, if you open people's eyes that the good guy is really the villain, you know, yeah, it's. I would love to say, yeah, we can do it, but I don't know.
You like to say that
I
we
don't
can.
know.
You like to say that we can do it. I mean, what? How do you get there? How do you have that type of cultural change in this country when it comes to now that we know that it's I mean, that's a crazy thing when you're thinking of the the fact that police killing black people is now basically a public health issue.
Hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
It's
I
the
mean,
norm.
yeah, or brutality, I guess I should say.
Yeah, brutality.
So I mean,
But you
that's
have to
a
want to. They have to want to. The problem. They have to want to admit that that's what's actually happening. That's what I'm meaning when I say we're being
Exactly.
gaslit. We're seeing what's going on. We're personally experiencing what's going on, but they're telling us, no, it's not. It's not that. That's not what it is. It's equal ground for everyone. It's just you know blacks are more resistant. But it's always a reason why it's happening to us because of something we're doing, as opposed to you're just overly policing me when you see me. You may be making something that's non-existent. You preconceive what's happening before you even try to delve into the situation to see what it is. Especially those who have mental illness, especially those who have a form of mental illness. A
well,
friend of mine.
I mean
No, go ahead. Go ahead. 'Cause I
no,
don't know if I can say it.
the issue is, I mean, as you look at the issue of policing in this country and all different institutions in this country and the impact that it has on the African Americans. I mean, I think that last week I believe we spent some time talking about how to how we have to not worry about the majority of society and kind of focus on doing things for self,
Hmm.
because we know after this period of time that we have to begin to start realizing that in order for us to do and get what we want, then we're going to have to realize we're going to have to look at for self determination and
Mhm.
basically do it for ourselves as opposed to looking at you know um, getting the majority involved or the majority of the society involved in what we're doing. And so and that's true. So it's um a very interesting topic and a very interesting subject to talk about
Hmm.
because where they talk about, I mean, I know we know heard of the book Souls of Black Folks, right?
Hmm.
Mhm.
And you are, being black in America is living a dual life, right?
Yes.
Because on one hand, there's you're living a life of constant conflict. Because on one hand, you're living in a way in which you're kind of like I guess for the lack of a better term, someone who is not fully, at least to some degree, accepted in society and in all of its institutions. And to the degree that you are, you're not treated equally, right?
Hmm.
But on the other hand, you realize that the only way that you can deal with that is understanding it and kind of like doing, they want you when they need you. And if they don't
Yeah.
need you, then they don't want you. You see
Right.
what I mean?
Hmm.
As they say, everybody wants our rhythm, but nobody wants our blues, so to speak. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the way that you're dealing with. So the question is, you know, there's been when you think about the history of all the movements in this country, specifically the movements after emancipation, all the way up until when we talk about the Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, and all types of movements that we've had in this country, and a lot of it was more or less focused on the movement of what we call accommodation or integration in this society. And then we had those who were, more focused on self determination and taking, making us say, hey, look, this is how they treat you. For example, the movement, the NOI movement, and, the way that Elijah Muhammad's movement, where it was more focused on self determination and doing for self, right?
Hmm.
So the question is, who had the answer? Who if we would have followed one path up until this point, what path would have been the best path? Did were we? I mean, I'm just asking the question. I mean, I'm just putting it out there. Was it the right? I mean, we spent a significant amount of time, um, going through the civil rights movement and following a course of action that was primarily focused on integrating and trying to make a society accept us that may not necessarily wanted to accept us. Was
Hmm.
that the proper way, or was it the most effective way of dealing with, um, you know, our plight in this country? Should we have focused on that? I'm going to ask
Uh,
that question, and I'm going to come back with another question that goes back to our subject matter.
uh, Clearly, I don't think it was as effective as we would have liked at all. Because we wouldn't be having this conversation if it was.
You
I'm
don't
going to
think
say
it was
no.
effective? What about you,
Not as
Rosa?
not as effective as we had hoped. Because I don't think this conversation would be one we would be having to this degree at all.
And I guess my answer is it's just very complex to even think about it because this is systematic.
Mm,
Right.
No matter what, no matter how, no matter who, the system chose this is who we're oppressing.
Yeah.
This is America. And no matter what happens, we're going to make sure they stay there.
Yeah.
And they continue to do that. They do it internally, but they also do it externally. And that's what has allowed America to be America.
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. That's true. Because we've tried both. I mean, we've tried multiple ways to get the job. I mean, to get a change to happen, and we've been peaceful.
well,
We've been
let
overly peaceful. Then we've
yeah.
been, peaceful. What did Tupac say? We're like, hey, we want to come in, blah blah blah, and then you take it and left level up and level up. Now we're trying to kick down doors and stuff or what have you. We tried every level, and like Rosa said, if this is systematic, it is what it is. This is
Well, let's look at it this way. Well, let's just go back. What about in Memphis? In Memphis, those police officers weren't white. Those
and
police
what say it
officers
again.
were those in Memphis. Those police officers wasn't white. They were black.
Got to have somebody in the house.
Huh? And then
That
what I'm saying.
you got to
So
have somebody in the house.
then let's. I'm going to be devil's advocate. You ready for me to be devil's advocate?
We're
Always.
ready.
Okay. So
Back
now
up, Rosa.
so now that we've got here, let's look at it from this another perspective, and this is what the devil's advocate is saying. All right, so now you have a situation where you have, are we responsible in any way for our own circumstances, or are they completely responsible for the situation that we're in. I mean, you begin from, I mean, clearly these things are true. Clearly, the whole social construct of color was something that was primarily, I guess could be. They went to the continent and they used their methods and tactics of divide and conquer, and were able to go and get individuals from the continent and bring them to the Americas and put us in the chattel slavery, maintain us in the chattel slavery for for centuries, and since that time maintained us in some sort of apartheid type of situation. Since within the last since the time of emancipation, and as well as the issue that we're dealing with the criminal justice system, the prison system, the prison system, right?
Hmm.
So, all right. So now the question is going to be, what is it that we can do, right? So, in other words, now everything is their problem. None of it has to do with us, our circumstances. I mean, is there any blame? I mean, so when we get into the discussion at some point in time as being devil's advocate, can we get? No, we know they're not going to do anything, right?
Hmm.
You see what I'm saying? We
Right.
know that they're not going to do anything. What do we do, and how do we at some point in time, change the dynamics as it relates to how we relate to each other? How does that happen?
I mean, look at what you're doing, Mr. Ellie. You have a whole radio. You have a whole law firm. You do it yourself.
Mm.
You don't, people, we shouldn't internalize racism and act on a victim mentality. We should act on a victor mentality and
I
know
like
that
that.
just
I like
because a
that.
system is oppressing us,
Mm.
that doesn't mean we can't change a thing.
Yeah, I like that.
I
And,
agree.
and I think that when we talk about, because basically what we're looking for, I mean, the question is, what are you looking for in the final analysis? Because this is, and we talk about this, and it seems like I keep going back to the same point. I mean, every conversation ultimately ends up bringing us back to the same point, because it's hard for me to, um, I'm not a journalist, right? I'm not a news reporter, and this is not really a news show. And there's a lot of things that I could say to get shock value, right? I mean, there's a whole lot that I can do to sit
Yeah.
here and I could get shock value and tell that. But at the same time, there's some sort of moral compass in me, and I guess also some degree of pride, self pride, that limits my ability to come out and completely, um, blame the fact that the people I know that do what they do are going to keep doing what they do. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very difficult. You know what I mean, to actually go down that road. And that's when we start with subjects, we typically kind of end up going back to the same thing as far as how do we deal with it. Um, and it seems like clearly we know. I could sit here the whole time and we can have an entire show and I can tell you what they do. And it's important that we highlight it because we need to let them know that I see you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I know
Yeah.
exactly, you know, what you're doing. But I think that at the same time, um, sometimes we lose focus, and we lose focus about the perspective. And now that it's a public health issue, then the question is, now that you've, and they have, the American Medical Association and has dubbed it as a public health issue. And one of the things that they even talked about is putting it on death certificates and stuff like that whenever the police is involved, whether it's something about whether they were in custody, in jail, on the street, or wherever it is, making sure that these things are being documented, right? And so, the question is, what's that going to do? You see what I
Another
mean?
paper.
I
It's
mean,
just
my
another
thing is
term.
what's that going to do? Whenever I look at, television. I mean, not TV. I mean, now I don't even look at television anymore. I look at a lot of podcasts and a lot of other
Yeah.
things that you can see and YouTube and different things that we see. That's where we're getting our and social media. That's where we're getting our news. And what we're doing is we're constantly seeing things. Like, for example, just recently we had a Tennessee legislator that came out when they were talking about the death penalty. And basically, he brought up the issue about bringing back hanging, right? And then you had a lot of people who came out and they were really talking about, and blasting him like they should. He apologized for what he said, but the racial overtones of him making that statement obviously, touch, basically, touch people the wrong way, right? And so, so my thing is that we can sit here and we can give. I guess with my age, my patience is thinner. You know what I mean? I get less and less and less and less patient with, you know, how to deal with things. And so, I guess that when we brought up this issue, and this is what we always said. Now we say it's police brutality a public health crisis. That's the question. I think that we've established that it is a public health crisis, right?
Yeah.
Then the question is, I think that then we go back to answer the question. Now that it's a public health crisis, where do we go from there? Now, let me give you an example. Let me tell you how this looked. Let's just say, for example, we had a medical doctor or some sort of physician or someone else, an EMT or someone else that appeared on my show as a guest. And I asked them the question. I said, "Hey, is police brutality a public health crisis?" And they come back and they say yes. And they'll give me the statistics and they can tell me about all of the things that has happened that would support the fact that it's now a public health crisis. And if I ask them the question about, hey, what do we do and how do we deal with this public health crisis? And then they would give me some sort of, you know, um, great, answer that is pretty generic and across the board about how we should have different policies, police policies and all these other things that we've been talking about for the last 400 or 500 years every time that there's a problem. And then the final analysis, what's going to happen? You're going to leave here and you're going to hear someone talk about it. You're going to feel kind of good because now somebody has recognized it. And now you know it. And now you feel better because you realize that maybe someone understands that your plight may not necessarily be your fault. Am I right or am I wrong? Is
Yeah.
that really what's going to come out? Am I really going to convince someone that, okay, I didn't know that police brutality is a public health crisis, and now I know. I mean,
Oh no.
is that going to happen?
No, I
You see
think
what I'm
Mm-mm.
saying?
no.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
see what you're saying.
So I mean, and I don't know how to even articulate, my outlook and my paradigm when it comes to these things. When it comes to these particular issues. Um, and at some point, I mean, when are we going to get fed up, man?
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? When are we going to get fed up? I mean,
Exactly.
we're not. I
They
mean, it's like you're going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and then what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that
Take your ball, and go home?
no, that's not they keep treating symptoms of a disease called racism,
Right.
but they treat the symptom, but they never talk about the disease.
Right. And the biggest thing, the now that this is where I believe that um the results are going to come in, or are basically a way of dealing with it, is there has to be, we cannot continue to do the same thing that we've been doing in the past.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And nobody, and most people aren't really doing. I mean, you have to do something. And part of our problem, I think, is discipline.
Mhm.
And we have to be consistent about some of the things that we are doing when we're addressing those issues of brutality, or those issues of not only brutality in all these other institutions.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and sometimes I think that, we say, what, they don't get it, but sometimes, man, do we really get it?
Mm.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, do we
So
really
true.
get it ourselves? Because we always talk about what we're going to do, and we're always talking about things that we need to do, but most of us aren't willing to do. Are you really willing to do what it takes, um, to get your freedom? And most people aren't.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's the reason why, Harriet Tubman said, I could have freed a whole lot more slaves if I could have convinced them that they were slaves,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because most people that at most, in other words, when her biggest challenge when she was trying to free slaves was trying to get the slaves themselves to change the way that they're doing things. And the hardest thing to get, and this is the thing of the challenge about us, is that you can sit there and you can talk to someone and they could almost acknowledge everything that you're saying, but they're not changing themselves.
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
leave, when you leave here today, assume that you're part of the problem. Assume that you're part of the problem. Just because you woke
Yes.
doesn't mean that you're not part of the problem.
Right.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying? What
Yeah.
are you going to do next week? How are you going to change your paradigm? You're stuck in it. You're stuck in your thoughts. And you're not willing, because every day when you wake up and you're going to do the same thing tomorrow that you did today.
Exactly.
And you're going to preserve yourself. And what are you going to do different than what you've done today? And most people aren't going to do that. Just like,
Mhm.
you know, armchair revolutionaries are the people who basically, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
What are
Mhm.
you going to really,
Yes.
what are you really going to do? And that's the issue. That's the change
Yeah.
that we have to see, because it's the same thing. It's just like, going to workshops and going to conferences and talking about what? And then when you leave there, what's going to happen? We're going to have the forum, and we're going to sit here and we're going to have, what are you going to do? So we're going to rent out the banquet hall at the Marriott, and we're going to summon all these people, and then we're going to summon the people that we want to recognize. They're going to come in. They're going to give us a really nice speech and get us all um, riled up.
All riled up.
Then they're gonna give him an award for being, somebody gonna get an award, and then we're gonna say what we're gonna do, and we're gonna be always gonna do something like we've been gonna do something for years. It's the same thing
Right.
when we talk about the issue of Dr. King. Now he's so celebrated within the community, and he's in some ways seen as someone who was more of an accommodationalist and wasn't seen as somebody who was as revolutionary as he was. But the reality
Mhm.
was most black people didn't want to have nothing to do with Dr. King during his time. He was seen as a troublemaker by most black people because they were scared of that. They didn't want him coming in their place and creating problems and creating trouble. You see what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so, and that's what they felt like, a lot of those individuals. And had more people been involved in that movement, regardless, that movement would have done a lot better. But there wasn't as many people in those movements as people would like to let out. Everybody all of a sudden was a revolutionary, and everybody talking about what they did during the 60s. Well, most of you didn't do nothing during the 60s. Don't even, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't like, you know what I'm saying? Because everybody's saying, well, you know what I mean? It's just like us and
Yeah.
what we're saying about the younger generation, what we did. Well, we ain't doing nothing, so why would we expect them to do anything? What are you doing? You see what I'm saying? Now we want to know what's
Right.
wrong with them. What's wrong with this next generation? I can tell you what's wrong with them. Us. We're what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what we always
Mm.
talking about them. And now we talk about they lazy. Well, they are, but we made them lazy. We didn't teach them work ethic. We treat them like babies. And
Mhm.
now we want to know why they act like a baby, because you treat them like they're a little baby. We got I saw a kid get out, open the door, get out of the car, walk to the trunk, pull out a damn stroller, and get in it. Uh-huh. What?
Oh my
Huh?
gosh. I wouldn't have made it. I
And
would
then
not have made
and
it.
then she pushed him around.
Oh, Lord.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm. Mm.
So it's crazy. I mean, and that's what we're and we don't sometimes we don't realize, you know, what's the greatness of what we had. Like for example, um, now keep it in mind that, and this is another perspective. I'm just giving another perspective about our circumstances and our situation. Is we want to ask this question, and I have a hard time articulating this. Sometimes I want to ask the question of what does that look like when we talk about equality in this country, and now we're saying we want certain things. My question is, what does that really look like? And this is what I propose. One of the issues my thoughts are this way. When I'm in a room of people that I know are racist, and it happens a lot. When I leave that room, what are my thoughts? Some people may have a thought of feeling sad and rejected and feeling bad and just terrible, right? That seems like a terrible feeling about the way you've been treated, right? That would be the
Mhm.
normal feeling, right?
Okay.
But you know what? When I leave that room, you know who I feel sorry for? Them.
Yeah.
You know why?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, how can you feel bad when evil does bad things to you?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the perspective. Is that if you look at let's look at the history of this country, right? And you know, there's some degree when you look. Sometimes there's this subconscious guilt, right?
Okay.
Guilt is a very bad thing to have to carry. Is guilt that you've done certain things. I mean, people carry guilt their entire lives about things that they've done to other people. There's people that commit murders, and why do you think a person who committed a murder 50 years ago comes out and confesses? Because it's that kind of guilt. And for me, I do not envy that guilt. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
I do not envy being in that position.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? There's that silver lining in the situation, is that in one hand you can only see what you see. And what you see is your circumstances. But what you don't see is that you have to step out of the box and you have to look in and you have to say, would I really want that? So that's what you're asking. When you're asking privilege, you're saying, I want to be treated like you. You understand? And the reality of it is that I don't want to be that way. Think about that.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And sometimes we miss that. We miss the fact that and then how you got there. You see what I'm saying? You said, so in other words, if I'm able to let's just say, for example, if I'm able to if I'm able to mistreat you and make you subservient in a way, or make you feel subservient and do everything I want you to do, Andrea, would you look at me and say, man, I wish I was like you?
Mm-mm.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
You know, so, or I wish that you would, treat me better. You see what I'm saying? I mean, what's the ultimate? So it's like I wish you would treat me equally. Equal to who? You see what I'm saying? So sometimes I think that we miss, although obviously I'm not co-signing the mistreatment of human beings and the fact of what they did. I'm just saying that that's not nothing to envy.
Right.
So the question is, what do you want? What does it look like in real time? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes that's where we kind of lose focus when it comes to how do we deal with it and how do we look at their position.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, ultimately, what do you want? Do you want to be you? You know what I mean? So in other words, you don't want to be that way. Does that make sense? Yeah. You know what? Dave Chappelle and some comedians have made some statements that I wholeheartedly disagree with. And these are statements where they suggest that if I could get out of the game, he was joking, but he said if I get out of the game, I get out of it tomorrow. In other words, if he didn't have to be black, he wouldn't be black. Right?
Yeah, I don't.
You see what I'm saying?
Whatsoever. Yeah.
I would not want to be nothing other.
At all.
Because I would not want to carry that burden. You see what I mean?
I mean, I'm dope, so that's my reason.
Yeah. So man, I can't believe it's over. I can't believe it's over, man. Because I had a whole bunch. I was just getting started, and we didn't get to get in. We do the same thing every week. But at any rate, I hope somebody got something out of it.
Seems like in the comments they did.
Okay. All right, then. Well, again, we thank everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, same channel.
The AM and 106.5 FM, KCAA Loma Linda.
You're listening to an encore presentation of this program, KCAA, the Inland Talk Express.
Views and opinions expressed by individuals on the following program do not necessarily reflect those of